What's going on, everybody? Hope you're having a good one, and welcome to the ROG Ally Power Saver and Performance Guide 3. And before we get started with everything on this list, just a little warning. If you're experiencing any performance degradation or crashing with your ROG Ally after setting your performance settings to any profiles mentioned in this video or any other performance guide, immediately set your ROG Ally to one of the default performance profiles provided by Asus themselves. And thank you in advance. Now, first and foremost, there are things you have to do before starting to game on your ROG Ally. A lot of people say they need to update one software or another or Windows, but one of the first things I did was download the AMD Software app. And in order to get the best battery life and performance, I advise that you download this app right now because we're about to get into some graphical settings that can help you and your Ally's performance to play as well as possible for as long as possible. So the first thing you need to do is go to graphics settings and turn on anti-lag and image sharpening. But most importantly, switch Radeon Super Resolution to on, because without this switch turned on, RSR is just not going to work for most titles. And to get the most high quality image at 720p if you want to play in that resolution. Next, set your global profile to gaming. If all you're doing on your ROG Ally is gaming, this profile will focus the GPU and CPU on games specifically when you launch them. So you won't even have to go into Armory Crate in order to have some kind of focus mode with your ROG Ally. You can just go to the file, and because it's set to gaming profile, whenever you go back to, say, your desktop or any kind of folder to see any kind of information, your ROG Ally will automatically go into power saver mode. So you'll barely waste any kind of battery going back into other apps other than gaming mode. And it will focus on the game specifically and put every other app into the back seat. And also in this video, I'm going to show you how to adjust your TDP manually on your ROG Ally. And the first profile I'm going to show you, I nicknamed Power Saver Plus. This profile focuses on performance and battery. So unlike silent mode, you're going to get a lot more FPS for relatively, if not identical, battery life. And to make the Power Saver Plus profile, just press the Armory Crate button, go into your settings, operating mode, and in operating mode, select manual. Now scroll down to SPL, set that to 11 watts. Next, go to SPPT, set that to 15 watts, and that'll be kind of your maximum wattage if the game isn't playing as intended. But for the most part, you will be set to 11 watts in most instances. And then set FPPT to 20 watts. And next up, we need to make sure the fan speed is enough not to waste too much energy and bring your overall APU watts too high, but to a normal level to save as much battery as if you were using silent mode, or an in-between of silent mode and performance. But these fan settings will keep your ROG Ally nice and cool for the most part, and we'll have it most of the time at 69 degrees Celsius. So with the fan speeds, you're going to see a couple points in the scale. Don't touch the first 3 points in the fan scale. Make sure the fourth point in fan number 1 is set to 74% at 69 degrees. So when it does reach 69 degrees, that's when the left fan will ramp up to 74%. You can't lower it from 74% to anything else because of the SD card issues and the thermal states that Asus has addressed. So they pretty much stick it to 74%. And once you set that fourth point to that degree and percentage, you can move the other points over to make more room for the fourth one. It doesn't really matter which point comes after the fourth one, because all you need to know is that the fan is going to ramp up at 74% no matter what after it passes 69 degrees Celsius. And yes, this may sound a little complicated to maybe if a kid is watching, but I'll provide some images and examples if this sounds a little too complicated. Now, with fan number 2, set that to 45% at 69 degrees Celsius. It's relatively going to activate at the same time as fan number 1, and that's exactly what you want. You want both fans to run as low as they possibly can while letting your system go to the temperature that's the most safe. Constantly blowing air on a CPU while it's in a safe temperature doesn't really affect anything. All it does is waste a lot more battery. And after setting fan number 1 and number 2 to their designated designated degrees and percentages. Just another warning again, if you do experience crashing or performance degradation with these settings on your ROG Ally specifically, just return to normal silent mode, because I'm going to provide settings for both silent mode and Power Saver Plus mode as well. And the best part about this profile is that it runs at almost the exact wattage as silent mode, but there's no audio crackling and the performance is improved almost twofold. Just saying, I'm available if you need me, Asus. And if you use silent mode and need to know how to disable the audio crackling, I provided a tutorial on how to disable it in the last Power Saver and Performance Guide for the ROG Ally, and that would be Performance Guide number 2. And lastly, when setting your ROG Ally to Power Saver Plus mode, as I call it, limiting your FPS to 45 will help smooth the frame rate, since that specific 11-watt setting can fluctuate the frame rate quite a bit. Limiting the FPS helps a great deal to smooth your experience out, with VRR helping as well. And besides Power Saver Plus mode, there is another profile that I'm introducing today, and I call it, for now, Performance Minus. This is for slightly more demanding titles, but to make sure your TDP limit is set to 18, because in performance mode, with some demanding titles, the ROG Ally automatically starts going to 20 watts, and that could put a damper on your battery life, especially if your temperature starts to rise and your fans start to ramp up. All that in tangent could give you about 20% less battery life overall. But with Performance Minus mode, you can limit your TDP to 18. And in order to do this, once again, go to SPL, limit that to 18 watts, and limit SPPT to 18 as well. Also limit FPPT to 18, and keep the fan speed at 75% at 69 degrees Celsius for fan number 1 and 45% for 69 degrees Celsius for fan number 2, just like with the first profile I showed you. And with all of that said and done, let's test out these profiles with some demanding and not so demanding titles. So the first game I tested is Batman Arkham Origins. That netted me 3 hours and 40 minutes on silent mode. And in case you don't know how many watts silent mode has, it has 10 watts. But sometimes it fluctuates to 9. And I managed to get that battery life at 1080p, 30 to 35 FPS. And that's with default settings. Now, I wouldn't recommend silent mode for Batman Arkham Origins, so we're going to try Power Saver Plus mode, which has 11 watts TDP. And with Power Saver Plus mode, I managed to get 3 hours and 20 minutes at 1080p with the frame rate between 40 to 50 FPS, and that's with default settings. And as you can see, it's a much greater performance increase with only 1 more watt added. And the next title I tried was Detroit Become Human. Now this is one of the most demanding titles on the PC platform, let alone an ROG Ally. And I managed to get 1 hour and 40 minutes in performance mode. And of course, performance mode usually lasts 1 hour and 40 to 45, so you can just assume you get 1 hour and 40 to 1 hour and 45 minutes in performance mode with Detroit Become Human. And that's with 720p 30 FPS lock in game settings. And make sure to turn on Fidelity FX, sharpening, and keep your settings in medium in general. Now, I switched the ROG Ally's profile to Performance Minus mode. And once again, this profile sets the ROG Ally to 18 watts TDP in total. And you can get 2 hours and 10 minutes with the same exact settings. And that is 720p 30 FPS. So you get almost the same exact performance with some dips in more taxing locations, like that street location at the beginning of the game. Usually the more taxing locations in this game are in the beginning, opposed to faster paced set pieces later in the game. And if you want the game to look almost identical to 1080p, you can turn on RSR and sharpen the image even further with AMD RIS. I tried comparing 1080p and 720p on my ROG Ally handheld mode with all the same exact settings turned on. And with both performance and performance minus mode, I saw very little difference in terms of image quality and performance. And just make sure you have that RSR option turned on in the AMD software app. Now, the next game I tested was Batman Arkham Asylum, and I managed to get 3 hours and 20 minutes at 1080p 60 FPS, and that's in silent mode default settings. And for titles like these, Power Saver Plus isn't really needed because Arkham Asylum is an older game, so it runs great on silent mode anyway. Now, the following game I tested was Batman Arkham City, the sequel to Arkham Asylum if you didn't know. And I managed to get the same thing, 3 hours and 20 minutes, but at 1080p, 45 FPS lock on silent mode. And for the most part, you will be reaching 40 to 45 FPS in Arkham City, specifically in silent mode. And that's with default settings. Now with Power Saver Plus mode, you can get a steady 60 FPS at 1080p with the battery lasting about 2 hours and 55 minutes. If you have your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth set off with brightness to 50%, you could probably squeeze out another 5 to 10 minutes, which will net you 3 hours in total. With Batman Arkham City at 1080p 60 FPS in Power Saver Plus mode. And the last title I tried was, of course, Batman Arkham Knight. I managed to get 2 hours and 25 minutes at 1080p 30 FPS with performance minus mode. And at 720p 30 FPS in silent mode, I got 3 hours and 20 minutes with Batman Arkham Knight. And of course, if you want your image quality to stay the same or relatively the same, make sure you enable RSR and AMD RIS. Now, the last test I conducted on Batman Arkham Knight was with Power Saver Plus mode. At 720p, you can get upwards of 45 FPS with 3 hours of battery life. And Arkham Knight, if you have your spatial sound enabled, is one of those titles that will have audio crackling. So if you don't want audio crackling, again, I provided the tutorial in the last video, but you're going to have to disable spatial sound. But with Power Saver Plus mode at 720p with 45 FPS and more, you get 3 hours with absolutely zero audio crackling. Not sure what it is about 10 watts and lower that makes the spatial sound freak out. But with 11 watts, you'll get a good amount of time with this title at a reasonable resolution and frame rate. But yeah, that was the last game I tested on this list. Even though the former instructions were a lot to handle, I thought at least providing 5 games to test out these new profiles that I introduced to you today and comparing them to Asus's default profiles would prove to be overall beneficial to everybody. And if you have any questions about these profiles, and if there's anything I left out, let me know in the comments. And thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hope you have a good one. Later.